Welcome to the short executive knowledge lecture on topic 2, paper 3 of the SFC licensing exams. This topic covers licensing and registration and is fairly detailed. I would say you're going to be looking at maybe around 7 questions. I will emphasize the important points to help you understand the core material you need to know to sit the exams. And as ever, a copy of the study notes you see on the screen can be downloaded from the Executive Knowledge website under Resources Paper 3. And once again, I strongly recommend that you supplement this learning with question practice that is provided by Examinator.online. So what have we got under topic 2? The licensing and registration requirements under the Ordinance. So we have to follow the law. We'll look at the regulated activities specifically for paper 3, dealing in futures, advising in future contracts, and providing automated trading services. Then we'll look at the licensing of corporations and everything that has to be done, and then the licensing of representatives. Now, the corporations, licensed corporations, not surprisingly, first of all, have to have the license, and then everyone working for that corporation that is involved in a regulated activity, they are the representatives. They must also be licensed. So looking at page 2.2, right at the top, we list all the areas that we're going to be looking at in this topic. So there's a reminder of what the 10 regulated activities are. And as we've said at the bottom, paper 3 is designed for those seeking to become responsible officers carrying out type 2, type 5 regulated activities. Moving on to a definition of what is dealing in futures contracts. Now, this is just the legal definition. It tells us right at the top, SFO definition is that a person deals in futures contracts if he or she makes or offers to make an agreement with another person to enter into, acquire, dispose of a futures contract, and induces or attempts to induce another person to enter into, acquire, dispose of a futures contract. Now, very legalese language. The exceptions are probably more important for the exam. So you're not considered to be dealing in futures if you're engaging in that act through a type 2 person. No exception if for remuneration. In other words, if you're a retail investor or if you are an investor going through a licensed corporation, you yourself don't need the license. It's the broker, the licensed corporation that needs it. Persons entering into market contracts, I wouldn't worry too much about that. That's with regard to clearinghouses. Person acting as principal, the professional investor. So if you are dealing in futures on behalf of a professional investor, not for clients, then you're not deemed dealing in futures. What it means is you don't need the license. Person engaged in above acts on markets referred to in the commodity exchange, I wouldn't worry about that. Type 9 licensees, asset managers who engage in the above solely for the purpose of type 9. In other words, you're an asset manager and you are buying and selling futures for your portfolios. You don't have to be licensed. You're not deemed as dealing in futures contracts with regard to being a regulated activity. Then we have a definition of a futures contract and a futures market. A futures contract, a contract or an option on a contract. So please remember, an option on a future is considered a future that's made under the rules of the futures market, and interest rates are property prescribed by the financial secretary. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Do I have to know these definitions? Every now and then they will examine them, but they shouldn't be that troublesome. Now, advising on futures contracts, remember that's type 5 activity. Definition is giving advice, issuing of analyses or reports to allow the recipients to make decisions on buying and selling of futures. Now, again, there are exemptions. You don't need the type 5 license if you're a solicitor, counsel, professional accountant, trust company, or Type 9 licensees, that's asset managers, who give advice wholly incidental to their profession. The wording is extremely important, wholly incidental. So that's not their main business. They can give some advice in futures, but they don't need to be licensed. Financial journalists and broadcasters giving investment advice, they, surprisingly, do not need to be licensed. Corporations giving advice, analyses, reports to wholly owned subsidiaries. So if you've got wholly owned groups and you're advising within the group, you don't need the license. And Type 2 licensees, that's dealing in futures, giving advice wholly incidental to dealing. Again, you don't need the Type 5 license. Providing automated trading services is regulated activity number 7. Now, there are 2 forms of this, and towards the top page 2.4, the services provided include trade confirmation and matching systems provided by brokers. That's in-house trading systems, in-house trading services. For that, you need a Type 7 license, and you're covered under Part 5 of the SFO. The second one there is full trading and settlement systems for non-local securities. So that's overseas exchange-like platforms that come into Hong Kong. They don't need to hold a license. For example, if NASDAQ ever decided to make their trading systems directly available to Hong Kong investors, they don't need to be licensed under Part 5 of the Ordinance. They need to be authorized by the SFC under Part 3 of the Ordinance. And that's what these points are covering. Okay, the other material I would say is fairly peripheral. Moving on to the licensing of corporations. We'll be looking at the licensing of corporations and the licensing of individuals. Now, with the license of corporation, general principle there, corporations have to apply for a single license, and that will cover them for one or more regulated activities. The corporation, usually people do it through lawyers, law firms will help. They have to be able to show they have enough financial resources, provide a business plan. The basic criteria for being a licensed corporation, you have to be a company, fit and proper, lodged that require security, carrying appropriate assurance, suitable premises, and have at least one responsible officer available all times. And we'll look at responsible officers shortly. You must have 2 per regulated activity, but what it comes down to is you must have 1 in Hong Kong, or 1 that's very close to Hong Kong. Now, a corporation must comply with the financial resource rules. And these rules are designed to make sure that the licensed corporations remain solvent. And they focus on both liquid capital, but also paid up share capital. So we've got to cover both of those. Now, remember, the financial resource rules are legislation. And if you breach the rules, you are breaking the law. Right at the bottom of page 2.5, I'll just read out this point because it has been examined recently. A licensed corporation must have an adequate amount of liquid assets to meet its liabilities. Yes. To extract the relevant liquidity information, the regulator, SFC, requires balance sheets to be prepared or adjusted on specified bases. Here we go. In accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, substance of transaction to be reported as opposed to legal form. Items on the balance sheet to be calculated on trade dates, not settlement dates. Liabilities not in the balance sheet to be included, no off-balance sheet financing. Now, that never used to be examined, but recently it's been popping up. Always be alerted when you see 4 bullet points, because that makes it easy to write a question. You just include 3 of them and change a 4th and see if a candidate picks that up. 341, top of page 2.6, the financial resources requirements. Well, the requirements with regard to paid up share capital for Type 2 and for Type 5 5 million Hong Kong dollars. If you're dealing in futures, that's your paid up share capital, and 5 million for advising in futures, except if client assets are not held. So if you're a futures advisor and you do not hold client assets, then there is no paid up share capital, but it's 5 million if you do. If the corporation, first bullet point there, is licensed for more than one activity, capital requirement, highest amount. In other words, if you are licensed for dealing in futures and advising on futures, then you don't have to hold 10 million. The highest you need to hold is 5 million. And then second bullet point there, approved introducing agents and securities advisors not holding client assets. Also, they have no paid up share capital requirement. Now, with regard to liquid capital is liquid assets less ranking liabilities. And we've given details in the boxes. Now, licensed corporation must always maintain liquid capital above the required liquid capital. It must not go below. Now, at paper 3, we must know the required liquid capital requirements. And for dealing, it's 3 million Hong Kong dollars. For advising, where it does not hold client assets, 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Where it does hold client assets, also 3 million for required liquid capital. Now, paragraph 342, we list what is considered to be liquid assets, and that continues, top of page 2.7. Accountants among you probably don't agree with some of these. They're just listing what appears under current assets, for example, prepaid operating expenses. Nevertheless, that is what the financial resource rules consider to be liquid assets. And then under paragraph 343, we list what is considered to be ranking liabilities. Remember, to get the liquid capital, we take the liquid assets minus ranking liabilities. Notifications to the SFC under 344. You must notify the SFC in writing in certain instances, and as you can see there, if the liquid capital falls below 120% of the required liquid capital, you must inform the SFC, but you can continue trading. However, if liquid capital falls below the required liquid capital, as we saw 3 million Hong Kong dollars, you must cease trading and inform the SFC immediately in writing. Now, the SFC may allow you to continue, but you still have to inform them before they make that decision. Also, if liquid capital falls below 50% of the last liquid capital reported, which means it's falling fast, you've got to inform the SFC. And then there's one or two other situations where you would need to notify the SFC, not as central, although I would highlight there, if paid up share capital falls below that required, you also have to notify the SFC. Now, the returns, liquidity returns, you must submit to the SFC. If you hold client assets, and I'm looking at the bottom of page 2.7, if you hold client assets, you must make monthly returns. Whereas if you do not hold client assets, you're a pure advisor, for example, you must make a return half yearly with financial statements, less details than required with the monthly statement. Top of page 2.8, if you fail to meet the financial resource requirements, it's a criminal offence. A breach with intent to defraud can carry a maximum sentence 1 million and 7 years imprisonment. So best not to breach the financial resource rules. Now, fitness and properness with regard to corporations, the licensed corporations, they must be fit and proper with regard to financial status or solvency, educational, other qualification, experience, strange with regard to corporation, ability to carry on the activity competently, honestly, fairly, and have good reputation, character, reliability, financial integrity. And then we give more details with regard to the financial status, to the competence and capability. None of this is complex, and character and integrity. Given that we're with corporations, corporations must have the suitable premises, paragraph 3.6. SFC approval, as we said there, is needed for premises to be used by a licensed corporation for keeping records or documents in connection with a regulated activity. So you've got to show the SFC you have the appropriate premises. Responsible officers, representatives, and executive officers, that is what we will start part 2 of topic 2 lecture.